Hello, everyone, and that's my new opening. I'm rather taken by my new opening, I must admit. About 2 weeks ago, I made that opening, and then promptly forgot it. And so about 2 days ago, when I was setting up for this, I was thinking I must do an opening for the new series of Vegan Time Tunnel. And so I opened up the thingy that I'm streaming on now. And there it was, and I thought, wow, I'd forgotten all about this. Is it any good? And I thought, yeah, it's great. In fact, it's so great, I'm going to play it again. There we are, a bit of self-indulgence on my part. So, so far, I've taken up 24 seconds of your time just with the opening of the new thing. So there you go. So welcome along to Vegan Time Tunnel Interactive, I've called it. And the idea there is that I want to try to interact with the chat much more than the first series. And so that's the plan. So I've called it interactive. So I'm taking you back now to 1979. That's where we're at today, and that was 44 years ago. And the reason I always know it's 44 years ago is that 1979 was the time when I went vegan. So I kind of I could do the maths pretty easy on that. Okay, so let's bring this up, which is our little kind of PowerPoint. I've called it Burning Fur, a Delayed Cremation. Okay, so yeah, so we're going back then to 79, and in general terms, this is me really, is that I've never really understood this kind of this phenomena of people camping and queuing up for days to buy things. I can't. I've never really kind of understood that, and yet they do. In fact, this picture here, the color one, is from the Black Friday thing, which is what's going on. There's also lots of pictures of people queuing for days to get a new Apple phone, this kind of stuff. So, I mean, this Black Friday thing looks like you have to camp for a long time, and then you end up in some kind of rugby scrum, So it's all a bit weird to me, I don't quite understand it. I've got to admit. So anyway, I do understand 1979, so let's go back there. And so we've got Faye Funnell, animal activist, as I said, and she had this kind of little kind of pet peeve in a way. She didn't like the fact that department stores could get hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of free publicity by holding sales. And in those sales, they would offer a star bargain, which would presumably get the attention of the journalist. Even worse for an animal activist, of course, is that this star bargain was often a fur coat. And so Faye Funnell decided to act on this and, as it were, not accept it and kind of try to kind of protest both things at the same time, in a way. Now, she was great friends at the time with Kim Stallwood. Now, Kim Stallwood was also very active in the late 70s and early 80s in the British movement. In fact, he would become a central player in the radicalization of the BUAV, the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. And so that will come up again next week or next time, because that's going to be part of the story about the British anti-vivisection movement. Anyway, they used to meet, these two, and they would regularly go to meetings together and also demos, that kind of stuff. And one day in 79, Faye said to Kim, well, look, I'm going to buy a fur coat at one of these sales. And as soon as I buy it, I'm going to go out on the street and burn it. And so that was the plan. So for a week in July 1979, Faye slept out at Debenhams department store, Oxford Street, London, in order to be the first in line to buy this goddamn fur coat. The coat was reduced in price. This was a summer sale from £795 to £79. Now, those are 1979 numbers, so I don't know what it would be now, but it would be a lot, obviously. But £795 in 1979 was a lot of money, and even £79 was quite considerable as well. So at first they thought that their entire plan had hit the buffers early on, in the sense that they found somebody camping there already by the time they arrived, but then they quickly found out that this person had no interest in the fur coat, and so their scheme was back on track. So what Faye had done is organize friends and people to accompany her on this kind of quest, if you like, and especially at night time, which, you know, she said we are going to need some bodyguards at night time, and she praised the youngsters in the movement, as we'll see in a while, because they provided a nighttime kind of vigil, if you like. So the day of the sale arrives, and Faye buys the coat. Yes, just see what. Yeah, that's still a lot now. Yeah, it would have been pretty much thing. Actually, funny enough, in Kim's account of this, he does say, I mean, he does say, for example, that her husband was a pilot. She was kind of middle class. She was kind of well off, because he was making the point that she was very respectable, which meant that interested the press. But in terms of her kind of, you know, in terms of being able to afford it, she was also able to do that as well. So she buys the coat. She takes it out, she plonks it into kind of like a basket type thing, and pours petrol over it and sets fire. So I got some pictures of this very thing. So the first one comes from Kim's 2014 book called Growl, and because it was Kim that took all these photographs of this particular event. So that's Faye right in the middle there, appropriately, as Kim said, dressed in black, and that's the coat burning. It's not very clear in that, but the next set of photographs, this is ironic because the quality of the photographs is worse, but you can also see what's going on a little bit better. So the first one, let's just get rid of me. The first one is Faye Funnel putting the fur coat into the basket. The second one is pouring the petrol. And then the third one is when the thing is on fire. And the guy giving Faye a peck, I believe, is her pilot husband, but don't quote me on that. And it's irrelevant anyway. Okay. So Faye made this statement while this event was going on, which got quite a lot of national press coverage at the time. She said 150 minks have died to make this jacket. As far as I'm concerned, this is just a delayed cremation for the animals. And then she did a piece in the Beast magazine, an exclusive piece, and this is what she said in that. Whilst 8 days on the pavement in Oxford Street is hardly to be recommended, regular visitors and supplies of food made the experience quite bearable. I could not, however, have gone through it without the dedicated young opposers of the fur trade who sacrificed their personal comfort to form part of a nightly bodyguard. And she finishes a little report. By the way, these beasts are all available, the entire series. In fact, even a couple of specials, which I didn't know about until recently. They all appear in on a website called the Talon Conspiracy, Talon, the Talon Conspiracy. So you can see that. In fact, that is an incredible archive of stuff. But don't read too much, otherwise you're going to ruin my vegan time tunnels. Okay. So, and she also said, this is how she finishes her report. I hope that mink will eventually cease to be looked upon as a status symbol. I also hope that in future Debenhams will give serious thought to offering something of real value, which is not offensive to human decency. Now, bear in mind, this was the age of single issues, which is another one of the time tunnels coming up. And so from a vegan point of view, we probably think, wow, if we were to look through that shop now as then, we're going to probably find thousands of things that are probably very offensive and also violate the rights of other animals. So there is that as well, that kind of little kind of time shift in that. And the final thing about the beast itself, this is number 2 of their series. It didn't last that long, but it was well produced for the time. And this is number 2, and this is 1979, obviously. And it's got Burning Mink there as the kind of bottom headline, if you like. And at the time, I was working for Ford's Motor Company on the production line. And I got a job, well, I was put right at the kind of start of the production line, as it were. And my job was I had to hook this, kind of back axle, bring it up, and then move it onto the production lines as it moved underneath me. And then turn around and get the exhaust pipe and kind of hook it through and all this kind of stuff. And I do remember that when I first was given the job, certainly in the first couple of days, I actually thought that the job was impossible. And I said that to the people around me. I said, you can't do this job. It's not possible. They were quite happy that I couldn't do it because it slowed the entire thing down, which meant it was easier for them. However, within 3 or 4 days, I was kind of like doing it like a robot, to the extent that I got 12 seconds in between cars. So a car would literally fly in over me and then land. And yeah, and so I was reading The Beast at work. And so I read these magazines 12 seconds at a time. And I just always kind of remember that. Now, coincidentally, that's the time of the new intro, but that is a total coincidence. Deb, did it? No, I don't think so. I think that might have been different, but don't quote me on that. Could have been. I mean, obviously, Bite Back. I think what you'd have to do is, if you go onto Talon Conspiracy and look on the inside cover, you'll see all the contributors. And if they're the same, then that would indicate that they probably did, but I don't know for sure. Right, let me have a quick check in case I've missed anything. Yeah, this thing about queuing, it's very odd, isn't it? I just never understood it. I mean, I suppose, you're talking about getting something very expensive, relatively cheap. So I suppose that's the reason. But yeah, I've never really understood it. Okay, I'm looking through the chat. What's this one? Stupid vegan. Okay. I shared your how farmers can combat vegan propaganda to our dairy farming, and the dairy farmer responded with slaughterhouse propaganda. Okay. What you mean, he posted some videos, or he said that? I'm not quite sure which one of those is thing. Yeah, and just to reiterate this at this point, that the full experience, the full Roger experience, if you want to have the full Roger experience, and it's on my YouTube, so that's where the place to be. Okay, so as I said, this is going to be pretty short because it was just the intro. Fascinating story about Faye Funnel, I think. As I said, I never forgot a name because of her name, but oh right, he posted videos. Okay, Oh, right. Well, I need to check that out then, because presumably, I don't know, are these industry videos? That would be interesting, because obviously the industry that slaughters other animals tend not to make that part very active. In fact, there's a famous kind of children's book. You know, the so-called meat industry used to send books out to schools in North America, coloring books, and it used to tell the story. I think it said from birth to beef or something. It was the story of beef. It was called, and all the different parts of it. Well, a lot of the different parts of it were there, but there was a total. The slaughter bit was completely missing. So you'd get you'd get the last picture being the other animals kind of smiling their heads off, as it were, on the truck on the way to the slaughterhouse, and then you just jump to them being dead and cut up into pieces. The actual slaughter bit was not there at all. Yes. Well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, how can they dress up a slaughterhouse? You know, somebody on that video did say, well, you know, aren't you in danger of making a welfare point? And I don't think there is such a thing as welfare footage. I think it's the claims around it that make things welfare. So if you're saying this is a example of animal use is a rights violation, we oppose it. So it would then become a thing. Now, my final act then is to show you the new end to this series, which I did do about 2 days ago, because I'd forgotten that I'd done the intro, but I hadn't done an outro, if that makes any sense. So, okay then, people, thanks very much for tuning in. And it'll be a bit longer next time, because we'll have a bigger story to tell. So, bye for now. Ta-da. Okay, so I've called this a British anti-vivisection movement. I know I said on the advertising vivisection, we're going to go into very, very briefly the kind of history of all that. And I called it Decline, Radicalization, Decline and Rebirth, ? And so it's interesting, the kind of interplay between anti-vivisectionism and veganism, at least, if you like, towards the end. Now, vivisection is a contested phrase in the first place. You know, we could say, well, do we do a Donald Watson and say, well, people need to be ripened up to this word? Or do we think, well, it'd be easier to talk about things like animal testing and animal experimentation on this? I mean, people like Joan Denea is very strong on the idea that we must say vivisection. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe the visceral kind of part of the word, maybe. And also vivisection is a bit misleading nowadays, because obviously vivisection is the companion piece to dissection. And so the difference between living and being dead already kind of thing. So we talk about cutting while alive. That's what vivisection kind of means. And so, so in that sense, it could be that the animal testing, which is a bit weak maybe, but animal experimentation. My sister once said that she thought that people might have a problem with the word experimentation. But again, so maybe people could put in the chat, what would you say if you were going to talk about vivisection? Would you use that term, or would you use animal testing? Would you use, you know, animal research, or what, you know, animal experimentation? Be interesting to see, because this is the Vegan Time Tunnel Interactive. Now, we've got a lot to get through today, and so I'm hoping to keep my eye on the chat. So I will be looking at that. So we've got a lot to do, and now I've also called it the British anti-vivisection movement. So that that's one limitation of this story, right? In fact, I'm only be talking about Britain, and also mainly about the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, which is now called Cruelty Free International. Excuse me. So that's one of the things. And the focus on the BWV is on its radicalization. So that's the early 1980s, and then the decline of the anti-vivisection movement in general, and then, as I said, the kind of rebirth. You know, I haven't been coughing all day. It's typical, isn't it? So, hang on, somebody's trying to ring me. I'm just going to get rid of that. Oh, dear. It's a good start. So mainly about the BWV, the radicalization and everything. Now, the time span, though, of this, we're talking about the 2nd century before the Common Era to the present day. So we've got quite a lot to get through. So I suppose we better get going. These are the main resources that I'm using, the main ones, not all of them, but the main ones. So Growl by Kim Stallwood. Now, I played a very, very small part in the BWV's radicalization in the early 80s, whereas Kim was a central player, a prime mover, as we say. Oh yeah, there's one. Maybe extreme animal torture would be another phrase that we could use. Although again, vivisectors will probably point to certain things that don't seem like that, you know. Well, anyway, let's not get into that. So yeah, then also the Norm Phelps book, The Longest Struggle, and then Slaughter of the Innocent. Now, a general apology that I know that people watching this on the phone are gonna they're gonna struggle with seeing some of the slides, so apologies for that. There's not much I can do about it. What I will do for some of them is I'll go full screen, but that's not really going to help you too much, but not too much I can do about that. But for one thing that you probably can't see is that little blurb at the bottom of the Hans Royce book, Slaughter of the Innocent, which came out in 1979. And it's by Spike Milligan, my kind of comic hero, if you like. A voice for the innocent of the animal world who, in the majority of cases, are dying painful deaths at the hands of a creature called Homo sapiens, who has time and time again proved he is not worth it. So there's a bit of Milligan for you, or Spike Maligna, the well-known typing error. So there we go. Okay, so anti-vivisectionist Ray Greek, I've not used much from him actually, says that people began researching on humans, usually convicted prisoners and other animals, from around the third century before the Common Era, but many point to a century before that, and in particular to Claudius Galenus, who is more commonly known as Galen. And some say that the reason he used other animals is because he wasn't allowed to use humans. It was kind of against the law. So that could be true. And in fact, he became a physician in Rome, and he became the doctor to the gladiators. So that's an interesting one. I think that might actually be one way that he could have a lot of contact with humans to do that, on the grounds that he's not allowed to research on them. And he is also the physician to 5 emperors. So he was known as the father of vivisection in many kind of histories. But his work was strewn with errors precisely because he researched mainly on other animals. So he made a lot of anatomical mistakes. For example, he thought that fruit was bad for humans, but he also thought that pus was good for us. So Royce is saying that Galen's teaching were disastrous for humanity. As I said, he made a lot of mistakes, but he was defended by the Catholic Church for a long, long time. And so that meant going against him was a dangerous thing to do. And so the mistakes that he made were, as it were, protected. Yeah, Michael, that's well, actually, funny enough, there are some there are some websites that say that Galen was a genius, medical genius and this kind of stuff. So you do get different versions of that, but certainly in terms of his mistakes, he made a lot of them, and they kind of, as it were, because he was protected, lasted for a long time. Then, just to bring things up to date, or at least move things along very quickly, we've got René Descartes from the 1600s and Claude Bernard from the 1800s. And Bernard, in particular, is seen as the father of the scientific method that is still used, so seen as a major kind of player in this story. So now we move to where we're supposed to be, which is the opposition to vivisection, and that is said to date from Victorian Britain. So we talked about 1837 through to 1901. So really, this is where the story really starts, if you like, which is a throwback to Spike Milligan. He used to, about 20 minutes into the Goon shows, he used to have an announcement saying, "So, folks, this is where the story really starts," even though it was kind of more than halfway through. Norm Phelps said that nothing really happened until Francis Power Cobb exploded onto the scene in 1863. So that's Power Cobb to the right. Looks like a formidable person, not to mince with, I imagine. And of course, Cobb is famous for her feminist writings as well as her anti-vivisection work. Probably anti-slavery too. There's a lot of intertwining this time in those issues. The one thing that she wasn't was a vegetarian. A lot of them were vegetarian. George Bernard Shaw. They kind of stood for against everything, if you like. Kim Stallwood said, in fact, that the abolitionist versus the reformist disputes flared up almost immediately in the anti-vivisection movement. And in fact, I suppose Cobb was central to that. I mean, she actually left some groups, started others, precisely because they kind of moderated their opinion. She was Dublin County born, so she was born in Ireland, and she began the Victoria Street Society for the Protection of Animals from Vivisection, which is a pretty neat but very long name. This is 1875, and then the BUAV in 1898. And so that marks the difference. She actually moved from the one to the other because the Victoria Street Society kind of moderated and she wasn't having any of that. So she formed the BUAV, and that included abolition in its name, kind of on purpose, the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. Of course, it's now been changed to a weaker name, which is Cruelty-Free International. And in fact, their history of their own group is a little bit confused. For example, they do mention that they were formed in 1898, but then they say that they changed their name to the BUAV in about 1947, I think it said. So there's a couple of mistakes there, I think. Also, the Little Brown Dog affair, that is part of this story, the vivisection story. But we're not going to go into it today because I've got a time tunnel all about that coming up. So that will have to suffice for later on. Interesting. Kim Stallwood talks about the old brown dog. He says that as the story of the old brown dog illustrates, the 2 decades immediately prior to World War I were a high point for agitation surrounding vegetarianism, anti-vivisectionism, and social progress in Britain. So that's pretty interesting. So we've got the formation of the anti-vivisection groups, as we said. As we move forward, Cobb is replaced by Dr. Walter Adwin. Now, when I was getting involved, I knew the Adwin Trust, Dr. Adwin Trust. That was one of the 2 big kind of alternatives kind of group, along with the Dowding Fund for medical research. So it was the BUAV that started the Hadwin Trust in 1970. One thing I didn't know about Hadwin is that he was charged with manslaughter because a girl he was treating died of tonsillitis. I didn't know that, but in the subsequent trial, he was found not guilty. But Kim Stallwood Riley comments that didn't do his reputation much good, though, in that sense. And also, he makes a comment about the fact that the anti-vivisection movement at this time had links to campaigns against vaccination and also for women's suffrage. So we could be going right back to Cobb there. Now, interestingly, Kim says both of which made the organization vulnerable to attacks from its enemies for being at once anti-science and secondly too radical. So I can understand why the enemies of the group would say that, but I'm not quite sure if I buy that analysis of it. The BYV had a publication, and so this is coming up to where I start to kind of register what's going on, called Animal Welfare. And Kim says, tellingly, it was called Animal Welfare. In the 1950s, the BYV they had a first campaign against Porton Down. So we're gonna talk about Porton Down a little bit later, but that's a secret experiment place in Wiltshire, and it involved chemical and biological weapons. And as you'll see, it's very kind of James Bond and still there to this day. The BYV also talked about the experimental other animals who were being sent into space at the time. So Kim also says that by the time we get to the 60s and 70s, things are slow in these days, as you can imagine, pre-internet and all that. The BYV began to respond to the government's early interest, as he puts it, in revising the 1876 Cruelty to Animals Act, which is to the left. I appreciate that nobody can probably see that, let alone people on the phone. And they responded to that by handing in a petition of 300,000 people to Downing Street in order to support, calls for reform and modernization of this act that kind of nobody likes. So the Cruelty to Animals Act is the legislation that regulates, oversees vivisection. So it's replaced 100 years later by the 1986 Animals Scientific Procedures Act. So we were very involved with that because I was very involved with the BYV at the time. And it was a piece of legislation that it seemed to be something that the anti-vivisectionists would welcome because it was a chance to update and improve the existing legislation. But it was also seen ultimately as a vivisector's charter. That's what Animal Aid called it. And so all the anti-vivisectionists now say that it was a dreadful piece of legislation and a terrible kind of missed opportunity. Now, in this book, this is Peter Singer's In Defense of Animals. That's the first edition. Kim said that, and that was 1985, he says that the most abolitionists of all the anti-vivisection groups, in other words, the BYV, had by the 1980s become appallingly archaic and Dickensian. And then he kind of clarifies what he meant in his later book called Growl. And he says, by which I meant that although on paper the membership was around 4,000 individuals, it was hard to locate any active members. The head office didn't have any means, including leaflets, of promoting its ideas or the organization, which in turn meant that the BYV did very little, if any, campaigning. So that is certainly true. It was kind of moribund. It was kind of like, it was just kind of dead in the water kind of thing. When the progressives moved into the BYV after taking it over, we're talking about very early 80s now. I just remember going in and seeing this kind of their stock cupboard. It's like a broom cupboard, a little kind of cubby hole kind of thing. And the only thing I remember was a few books written by the director of the organization. I think there was a few copies of this animal welfare journal. And then there was lots of tea towels depicting the North Yorkshire town of Harrogate. So I'm not actually quite sure why all that happened. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. The Harrogate tea towels have always been a mystery. I've never got to the bottom of that. Right, so we're up to the 1970s and 80s then. So this is the context of what led to the radicalization of the BUAV. Progressives in the movement were casting their eyes on the RSPCA, and Kim said that organization was dominated by people who supported hunting, and they saw the main aim of the RSPCA as essentially stopping cruelty to cats and dogs. So the progressives set about doing something about the RSPCA. It's really interesting. In the press, the progressives are always called the Young Turks versus the Old Guard. That's usually the way it's put together. There's quite a few people in the kind of RSPCA reform group that we would know, like Richard Ryder. There's also Richard Corse, Dick Corse, he was called. He was a main player in the League Against Cruel Sports and various other people. And so it was another one where you had this other kind of stagnant organization and also one that promoted animal use. But then again, it was the RSPCA. So yeah, it did. You know, there wasn't as much confusion about the RSPCA then than there is now. At the same time, it was still thought worthy of trying to improve it and actually get it to, you know, at least stand up to its name within its own remit, if you like. I remember, see, they got people to join. I think somebody paid for me to join the RSPCA at this time. And so I remember going to an EGM or an AGM, and it was in this swanky hotel in London. And I do remember the morning session where we voted that the Queen would be thrown out of being the RSPCA patron on the ground that she went shooting and hunting. And that motion passed. And then we went for a lunch break to be told that the RSPCA Council had reinstated the Queen as patron in the lunch break. So nothing much changed. Again, Young Turks and Old Guard. So Stallwood was kind of involved with this RSPCA reform thing, and he thought, well, I wonder whether this strategy would work with the BUAV as well. And so he was well placed at this time because a little earlier in 1978, he had, along with Faye Funnell, and Faye Funnell is the person who burnt the fur coat that I mentioned in the kind of intro to this new series. Faye Funnell and Angela Walder and Kim Stallwood, they co-founded the Coordinating Animal Welfare Group, which was called CORE. It was used as a kind of mobilization tool and a radicalization tool, if you like. Again, this is pre-internet, and so it was a networking idea. Now, Angela Walder later became the scientific advisor for the BUAV after it had been radicalized. I remember a time when she told me that because she was an animal technician at one point, and so she used to have the job of taking the other animals from the holding unit to the lab, and she said that the government inspectors wouldn't go into the animal house, and the reason for that is that they didn't want to get hairs on their suits. So that's how good the the inspections were. Anyway, back to CORE. So CORE, Coordinating Animal Welfare. Despite the name, it was central to what we call animal rights in those days. It was pretty active. It was this coordinating group, as I said. It did the first public screening for the Animals film, for example. So we talk about 1981/82. It oversaw the closure of Club Row, which was a notorious animal market. That's going to come up in a little while. Had presentations from some of the big names in the movement at the time, like Clive Hollands. Clive Hollands was the president, I think it was, of the, SSPV, the Scottish Society for the Prevention of Vivisection, one of the Scottish groups. Also, Richard Ryder gave talks, and philosopher Peter Singer as well. Did Tom Reagan talk? I hear you ask. I don't know. I don't think so. Also, at the core meetings, organizations would set up some stalls, which is to sell books and give out free information. And also, they would provide vegan-friendly food. And another thing they did was they coordinated the campaign to take over the BOAV, or win control of the BOAV, as Kim puts it. And in fact, Kim at this time was already working for the BOAV. So this is a really weird thing, because he was essentially trying to take over or close down his own employers, right? And so they found out about it, and of course they weren't too happy, and said to Kim, well, look, if you chair another meeting of CORE, then you're out the door here, type of thing. And so for a couple of meetings, he sat outside the CORE meetings, just sat outside in the street. People would come out and tell him what was going on. And of course, the BOAV people found out about that as well and weren't too happy again, and eventually kind of let him go, as I think is the phrase that people use nowadays. So we're up to early 1980s, and indeed the Young Turks do take control of the BOAV's executive committee. I joined it in 1982. Kim Stallwood was rehired a year earlier, so we talk about January 1981, and became the BOAV's campaign officer. Let me bring this back in. And Kim said, our revolution at BOAV sent shockwaves throughout the British animal rights movement and beyond, including the United States and Australia. Now, that, in my assessment, that is really accurate. It's difficult to overplay the effect that what was going on at the time. This was kind of real peak in stuff, but the BOAV's radicalization was a major part of it. And one reason for that is that for the first time, relatively radical people had access to quite a lot of money. You know, Animal Aid had started in 1977, and they were doing a lot of locally based stuff, a lot of leafleting and this kind of stuff. They used to specialize in giving leaflets out at the tube stations in London, for example, but they also had local contacts. So there was a kind of lot going on. The HSA were very busy. The ALF was very busy. They had the Animal Liberation Leagues, the regional groups as well. So a lot started happening, and the BOAV's radicalization was a lot to do with it, because they ended up being a really big coordinating thing and publicized everything in their magazine, which they started to call the Liberator. And they changed it from Animal Welfare to the Liberator. And it was a big, glossy, quite horrible looking thing. And then they made it into like a tabloid. So I've got some shots of that coming up. Now, I don't know what happened to the Harrogate tea towels, but they were quickly replaced by posters and leaflets, including fly posters. Now, the fly posters from the BOAV were pretty graphic, so I'm not going to show you them. I've actually got a couple of shots of them, but they're so small you can't really see them later. But I'm not going to show you them. I was a volunteer at the BOAV at this time. It was just before I became a committee member. And the fly posters, we kind of sent them everywhere. So I remember being in the office and we bundled together lots of the leaflets, all these fly posters, and we sent them to just about anybody we could think of who might put them up, you know, might do a little bit of fly posting. And in fact, that's what happened. We started to get lots and lots of photographs of these fly posters all over the country, and they ended up in the press. It caused a big stir. And then the BOAV got into trouble. I remember that, because I think they put their name at the bottom of the fly posters, and maybe even their address, maybe even have the phone number. And so a lot of the local councils started to threaten to sue them for either advertising space or kind of criminal damage, because, you know, obviously fly posting is on empty buildings, that kind of thing. So I do remember they had to reprint all the posters and take their name off them, and then they all went back up again. So that was pretty good. Now, in terms of things going on nationally, the BWV became the main organizer for the World Day for Laboratory Animals, which is April the 24th. Now, I'm a bit sketchy on the fine details of this, in the sense that I think the World Day might have existed before, and it might have initially been run by the National Anti-Vivisection Society, NAVS. But I think what Kim did, because he took over the organizing of it for 6 national demos, I think he either revitalized it or he might have actually come up with the idea. I'm not sure about that fine detail. Now, the first one that he organized was 1982, which drew a crowd of, well, people say between 5,000 and 6,000 people. And this involved walking 6 miles from a town in England called Salisbury through to Porton Down, where these warfare experiments go. I'm going to make that full screen. You see, it's very James Bond, isn't it? You see that picture of the lab, Britain's secret nerve gas lab. You know, very Thunderball, I think. And so it's still there, and it's still doing all kinds of horrendous things, as far as I'm aware. So that was the second time really that the BWV had picked on Porton. So this is the Liberator, talking about the siege of Porton. So this is 1982, the big picture, the Liberator, and then the smaller pictures, they are from 1983, when some people returned to Porton Down, and they also stopped these trains, a bit of civil disobedience. The picture at the bottom, of course, is people, as it were, getting taken off the tracks. This is a shot of the storming of Porton grounds. There was a lot of talk about whether it was a good idea, in the sense that we talk about chemical and biological warfare experiments, but obviously you wouldn't get that far anyway, in a sense. Now, the largest of the demos that Kim Stewart organized involved 9,000 people, and 600 of those took part in this kind of elaborate street theatre, which was pretty good. What happened was, every 6 seconds a bell chimed, marking when one of the laboratory animals was killed, and they had some people dressed up as vivisectors who kind of came and grabbed one person from the crowd, and kind of executed them on the spot and left them lying there. So at the end of the 90 minutes or so, there was 600 people kind of dead, as it were. So it was quite a effective stunt, if you like. And although you can't see it too well, that Liberator, that picture actually is about that particular thing. It says 600 people die in Trafalgar Square. So that's what that one's talking about. The person giving a talk there is Jeremy Corbyn, who became the Labour leader, of course, in political terms. Okay. Now, what was I going to say? I was going to say something more about the, oh yeah, really, Kim was talking about the achievements of the BWV, and they're not kind of great in a way. It said, for example, that they ignored the protests about the update, and they came out with this vivisectors charter and everything. But he said that it did lead to other things later, you know, down the line. He says, for example, the British government subsequently banned the testing of cosmetics on other animals in 1997, and the LD50 toxicity test in 2001. The LD50 test is a pretty gruesome thing. In 2003, the European Union agreed to a membership-wide ban on cosmetic testing to happen 10 years later in 2013. So, as you can see there, it, you know, you wouldn't put that down as massive kind of gains, but it's certainly, in terms of promoting what was going on, pretty good. So before we go into, as it were, the decline, I just want to go through a few slides showing some of the impact of what was going on in those days. So let's see what we've got. Now this is interesting because the merchandise for the new radicalized group were really good, and they were put together by a group called Animus. I used to go to Animus to get our badges and everything because we started an animal rights shop in 1982. We think it's the first animal rights shop in Britain at the time. So we used to get all the sales goods from all the big groups on sale or return because we couldn't afford to actually get them in. And so we used to get this big range of T-shirts and sweatshirts and everything. There's badges there on the second row. The enameled badges, I think they were a hangover from the previous time. I think they must have found them in the office and everything. So then you got books. Is Tom Reagan's The Case for Animal Rights there, Roger? I hear you ask. No, it isn't. But Animal Liberation by Peter Singer is, of course, and a couple of scientific anti-vivisection books as well. But then again, we are talking about 1984 here, but the case was out by then. Then you've got all the posters and leaflets, and you used to have to pay to get them in those days, but that's the way it went. Again, this is all pre-internet, so it was much more difficult to kind of pass things around in a way. But they were very, very kind of powerful resources. This every 6 seconds is really the kind of trademark slogan of the BOAV, according to Kim Stallwood. And it was everywhere, including kind of train stations and stuff. They had those big posters that you see now with Go Vegan World. They had big posters about it. They also had leaflets. This actually is an advert which was published in newspapers. When I was on the committee, we used to get a rundown of all the the advertising. Did we get any new members from this one? Did we get some new legacies, this kind of stuff? And they usually got put in the kind of more lefty kind of papers. It was usually a waste of time putting them in the kind of right-wing press. So we used to get quite a lot of members through actual kind of proper advertising, if you like. And so we used to use that general slogan every 6 seconds. Now, again, for the people with phones, there's no way you're gonna see this, so I apologize for that. But this is a week of action. So this is the kind of galvanizing of the grassroots, which was part and parcel of the radicalization of the BOAV. So these are kind of a week of action, and these are all the photographs from all the stuff that's kind of going on around it. Oh yeah, well, I did want to say this is a shot from Scotland, and if you recall the posters and the badges and all that kind of stuff, it's actually very difficult to find posters and badges and everything which have got a lot of claims about cruelty back in those days. Like, for example, here one of the main banners is "Animals have rights," right? And so that's kind of the main claims making at the time, if you like. And so you don't get the kind of same cruelty claims as you do in the modern movement. And I think it might be, and this is only me speculating, of course, it could be because at the time of the BOAV radicalization, it was a time when people were trying to do something about the RSPCA, but we knew full well what the RSPCA was, Traditional Animal Welfare Group. It wasn't, it wouldn't go near veganism with the barge pole. We know that. Whereas in the modern movement, I think there's some confusion about the things like the RSPCA, and I think that's something to do with the prominence of the word cruelty in the modern movement, because they see prevention of cruelty to animals and think, veganism. Of course, that doesn't connect with the RSPCA. It's not to do with it. The Liberator to the right there, Horace Hazelton. So that was a group that I co-founded, the Hazelton Action Group, and we'll be talking about that in another time tunnel coming up. But this is just self-indulgence on my case. What we did was we broke in and retrieved quite a lot of paperwork about paraquat experiments that they were doing. Ended up in an anti-vivisection book, and on the front page of the Liberator and also the NAVS journals. I think Animal Aid covered it as well, so that was pretty good. And one of the first victories, I suppose, is Club Row Goes. So this is early '83 at this stage. So this notorious Victorian kind of market, kind of East End market, very kind of grubby place, did close down in the end. Problem with that, of course, is that it moved somewhere else. So this is, you know, often a problem. You have a long-standing kind of, you know, long-standing campaign, and then the target, as it were, moves elsewhere. This is, yeah, this is a bit of an attack on Charles River, another animal breeding place. Charles River used to, I don't know whether they do, but they used to own islands where they bred primates for research. I don't know whether they still do. And then this was the London Underground, and as you can see, it's another one of the BYV big posters. Curiosity will kill this cat, but they also had the every 6 seconds one on there as well. And the guy in the picture is Mick Heslin, who was a kind of graphic designer for them, still active on Facebook, and he also accompanied me, or I accompanied him on the Orkney trip in terms of the Sea Shepherd. So that's going to be another time tunnel as well. So that's pretty good. Just a couple more Liberators, and again, if you want to actually read these, go to Talon Conspiracy, and you can find the full thing, and you can actually leaf through each and every one. Another March 8,000 this time. And then the BYV prosecutes surgeons. Now, I don't know whether you can see that, probably not, but the vivisectors had tattooed the word crap on the monkey's forehead. So, yeah, that's what vivisectors are like, folks. Okay, now, so the decline, really, let's just drop this out for a second. So the decline of the BYV, there was a lot of push to put animals into politics at one time. Now, Kim Stolde is really big on that. I tend not to go for it. I think we need cultural change first. There was something called GCAP and putting animals into politics. GCAP now, what was that? General Election Coordinating Committee for Animal Protection, I think it was. And they did a series of kind of general elections in Britain. And what they did was they would contact all the parties, first of all, try and get them to do something about animal welfare in their manifestos. And then kind of when that was done, they would then recommend to their membership who to vote for, essentially. So some of the activists weren't too pleased about that on the grounds that they thought that, you know, action and campaigning was kind of more important than messing with the politicians. I mean, they'd also seen the start of the kind of campaign and lobbying that led to the hunting ban. So you ended up with the League Against Cruel Sports kind of taking MPs out for steak dinners and stuff. So it's very difficult from a kind of a vegan point of view. But of course, veganism wasn't the moral baseline of the movement at this time. Boots was an issue. When Ronnie and I were in prison, we got news that Boots, I think, had sued the BYV, and I think they were ordered to pay £30,000 to Boots the vivisectors, and I think they agreed to do it, and we were opposed to it. We said, well, look, just close the BYV down. You know, it's just a name, it's just a group, and then once you've done that, just start it again with it. You know, but they wouldn't do that. Then they changed a few things. For example, one of their taglines was against all animal experiments to reflect their abolitionist thing. And then that was changed to against animal experiments. So took the all bit out. And then they changed the name in full to Cruelty Free International as well. And then we have the difficult issue of the rise of vivisection as the moral baseline in the movement, which really is mainly just this century. But it really put anti-vivisection on the back foot, really. And so in that sense, yeah, it's you know, a lot of people kind of regret the fact that a lot of attention was given to veganism over animal experiments, whereas, well, there's an interesting chapter in one of Gareth France Jones' books where he says that vivisection is a trickier question because it's the only part of animal use which is not transparently frivolous, right? So there is something in that, and I think me and Ronnie have talked about that on Staying Alive as well. So vivisection kind of, I mean, it still bubbled under really, but it kind of disappeared as, you know, as veganism became the main thing that everybody started doing, then vivisection got kind of pushed a little bit. But as I gave you a hint before, we do have Camp Beagle now, and so that is very active at the moment. I think there's been a couple of splits in that movement, but don't need to go into that. But there is a thing about focus on beagles or focus on dogs, or, you know, one species at a time. These kind of ideas, which might not go well. And again, we've then got the kind of cranky vegan issue of it doesn't matter if people are not vegan, right? And so there's quite a lot of people at Camp Beagle who are not vegan. So that can be an issue within the modern movement, which wasn't the case back in the 80s, for example. This is one of the days of action when they were trying to block the beagles coming out. As you can see, lots of yellow, that's all the police officers. And this is a good sign here. Police and MBR Acres, that's where Camp Beagle is, escort puppies for torture. So so that's pretty good. Now, I think, oh yeah, I got one more to show you, I think, which is, I think, a special shout out perhaps for Speak and for Mel Broughton. Mel is still in prison, as far as I know, but they have kept things going, really, for in terms of vivisection, but sometimes fairly low key. If you look at their Facebook page, they complain that, you know, oh, it's 4 days after the World Day for Laboratory Animals, and now we can only get 6 people out, you know, that type of thing. But the World Day for Laboratory Animals still goes on, but instead of thousands of people, you're now getting kind of hundreds. And then before I came on the air, I said to Ronnie, what's going on apart from Camp Beagle and Speak? And he said there's a National Day of Action against the British Heart Foundation coming up in February. And he says there's also regular weekly protests against Sequani Animal Research Lab in Ledbury. So there are some things that are still kind of bubbling under in terms of vivisection. Whether it will ever get back to the glory days, as it were, of the 80s, I'm not so sure. And I'm not so sure whether the focus should go back off veganism. I think that that would probably be a mistake. Just going to have a quick scan through the chat and see what I've missed. We're all right. We're talking about the language then. I'm against animal testing. Self-identified vegans strongly defend it. Yeah. Jeremy, thinking about language, what's going on? We don't cut them, it's okay. Yeah, that is an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's the kind of problem with vivisection. Although even the official definition now is extended to animal experimentation, so it would kind of feature all of that as well. What's this one? I've not really thought about it. I've always said animal testing, and that's what I've always heard. Yeah. Jeremy, I prefer breeding use and murder through animal testing. Yeah, well, that's a pithy little slogan, Jeremy. So, yeah. And then Debbie's saying most people don't really know what the term vivisection means. Yeah, but that's where the idea of ripening up comes from. I mean, the same thing would be said about most people don't know what animal rights means in a philosophical sense. And that means that we haven't done a very good educational job, if that's the case. but it also means that we could make them aware, and you would start that with the journalists. You know, the movement seems to have lost its ability to liaise with journalists, and it could be the internet age. This, in the sense that back in my day, you get to know individual journalists, and you would, because they would be like connected to a newspaper or a radio station for a long time, right? I don't think nowadays that kind of happens. So I don't suppose you can get that kind of relationship. But if you did, it would mean that if they did make a mistake, you would go back and kind of gently say, well, you know, actually there's this and that, you know, and that kind of, and that would improve their coverage for the next time. So yeah, so that would be a kind of ripening up thing, which would probably start, I would think, with the journalist. Oh yeah, I've shown you that one. That's extreme animal torture. Exactly, Deb. Need a phrase that gets the horror across to the general public. Yeah, I get that. I can see that point completely. Yeah, Michael's making the point that I kind of alluded to, which is that animal testing is almost a bit of a soft, it seems a bit soft. Animal experimentation, animal research. See, again, is animal research a bit vague? You know, maybe there's no kind of perfect phrase as usual, I suppose. What's this one, Deb? Michael Gree, have you seen the jokes about animal testing depicted other animals sitting at desks? Oh, okay. Yeah, well, joke. Have you got joke in inverted commas there? It should be, shouldn't it? If they're as bad as that. Yeah. Tester doesn't really say much, Jeremy is saying. Yeah, well, here you've got the problem. I mean, this is the extrapolation problem, in the sense that, and this goes all the way back to that Galen situation about maybe all the mistakes he made is because he wasn't allowed to research on humans. And the logic of vivisection is to do it on humans, you know, let's face it, because otherwise you're going to get all the species difference problems. You're going to get the extrapolation of data kind of problems. Not that human testing completely eliminates that anyway. For example, if you test on elderly people in order to find something for young people, then that might not translate too well, and vice versa. Also, gender might play a role, and also some racial characteristics can certainly play a role in terms of things like sickle cell amnesia, that kind of, I probably said that wrong. And those kind of issues. So there are lots of variables that can kind of get in the way. But in terms of the people that did research on humans, and of course, in recent history, we've obviously got the Nazis, but also the Japanese in the Second World War as well. That is kind of the logic of vivisection, because it kind of gets around those problems. If you look at something like thalidomide, for example, this is the kind of complexity of the problem, that thalidomide caused a lot of these teratogenic, the monster-making kind of effects because of the metabolism. So the mother would take, the pregnant woman would take the product and then metabolize it. And so that creates a metabolite. And then that metabolite goes into the placenta, which also metabolizes the metabolite. And then that goes into the fetus, who then also metabolizes it. So this product is getting metabolized 3 times. And so this is the complexity of trying to get to the bottom of these issues when you're doing these kind of tests. People are bringing up some good points about testing. But I think many know what it means when we talk about it. It's generally understood. Maybe add exploratory harmful testing. Yeah, then you got obviously the toxicity tests and this kind of stuff. Yeah. Even non-vegans are aware of cruelty-free. Yeah, so I mean, I suppose in terms of, although I don't like the name cruelty, I can understand why it's on the, you know, that they changed the name from the BOAV to Cruelty-Free International, because that has become a kind of thing. Although it's ironic, isn't it? Because cruelty-free, from an anti-vivisection point of view, doesn't necessarily mean vegan, doesn't it? I mean, for example, just down the road from me, there is a bottle of shampoo which is endorsed by PETA, and it's got honey in it. And I believe some of the BOAV stuff are not, kind of strictly speaking, vegan. So you've tended to have the two logo, you know, the kind of leaping bunny for the vivisection part of it, and then the vegan one to make sure. I think if you get a product with just one of those symbols on it, could be a problem. Yeah. As Roger is narrating and using the term experimenting on animals. Yeah, well, I was reading a lot from Kim Stolberg, so don't blame me. Right, let's just see if there's anything else. Yeah, so there's a big long chat about the language. So very good, excellent stuff here. I will have to come back and read it when I haven't got the stress of being live and all that. Same to that. Don't know what that means. Okay. Oh, then we moved on to Jeremy Corbyn. Is Corbyn, as far as I know, long-term vegetarian? And of course, with a lot of long-term vegetarians, the answer is, you know, at this stage, but at any time. I mean, kind of why, isn't it? You know, but I mean, long-term vegetarianism is an odd thing. You know, a lot of people thought of it as a gateway to veganism and all this kind of stuff. So long-term vegetarianism has always been a bit of a puzzle for vegans, isn't it? You know, so there you go. Love the merch. Yeah, there was some good stuff on there. Remember one of the Animus badges I used to love, which was says beans means vegans farts, and it was a play on one of the adverts that were on the TV about Heinz beans. But that was actually very popular. So some of the rude ones, you can imagine. I mean, even now with the VIP, some of the rude ones are very popular. You know. So now this is interesting. I think the LD50 test has still been done. All right. Okay. Yeah, I think Kim was saying in Britain. And the LD, yeah, so we'd only talk about Britain there. So presumably, you know, Brexit will have changed everything as well, I suppose. So, I mean, the European Union has agreed to a membership-wide ban on cosmetic testing. So does that apply to Britain now? Although they seem to have had their own just British-wide ban at the same time. But I imagine Brexit has altered things in a fairly complicated ways, I suppose. So I'm a mind reader, okay? I don't think so, but never mind. Rights language, okay. Okay, folks. Well, let's just get to the bottom of this in case I'm missing anything. Oh, yeah, I think this is Joanna saying that, yeah, indeed a vegetarian. Unfortunately, still is. He should go vegan. He should indeed. And I mean, you know, Corbyn has kind of rubbed shoulders with our movement for long enough now. Yeah, Jeremy reminds us of this Save Ralph short film, of course. Jeremy, you kind of, I kind of forgotten about that, but you've, it's like an animated thing, wasn't it? And you promoted it heavily about, what, getting off for 2 years ago now. I'll have to check that out again. Anybody remember the Save Ralph film? I think it was on YouTube and probably still is. I don't know. Yeah, Colleen, this is the kind of cranky vegan area now. Of course, is that the fact that there are some people who are opposed to vivisection, but it's the same with. I mean, it was very odd to me around 2000, 2001. There was a huge foot and mouth problem, and there's also a live export campaign, and one of the lead groups in that was Compassionate World Farming, and it was said in the press, kind of in between the lorries coming and throwing stones at the lorries and everything, they would be kind of eating ham sandwiches and stuff, and so yeah, to vegan ears that's very odd. Someone like Jake will say, yeah, but we should kind of be tolerant of it to an extent. I mean, it's a question of you're tolerant, but for how long? And also the issue that I always bring up is that I wouldn't want people like that to be the spokesperson for the campaign, because they're bound to say the wrong thing. I mean, we've had that in the past. Oh, you don't have to be a vegetarian to care and this kind of stuff, and that's not the right message at all. And then you've got the other side of it. Vegans were protesting. Actually, one of the pro-vivisection groups is called Protest, isn't it? So, which is, I suppose it's a thing. Yeah, just a reminder about Mel, HMS Peterborough. I don't know the current regulations about what you can send and how frequently and all that kind of stuff, but it wouldn't be too hard to find it out, I don't think. Right. I think we're maybe through. I think what I'm going to do next week is probably go back to the account of the animals film, which we started series 1 with. So we'll probably go back to that. I've actually got some new stuff. One great thing about, as it were, having to do this series again is the fact that gives you a chance to add bits in that were missed out from before. So that's pretty good. Right, people, I think I've taken up enough of your time already. Oh, has that been an hour? Really? Oh, blimey. I really didn't know it was an hour. That's really flown past. So, everyone, I would like to thank you for tuning in, and I shall see you next week. Vegan time tunnel again. Yeah, so I suppose really we could regard this session as a bit of a kind of companion piece to the one that I did about the anti-vivisection movement in Britain, in particular the BUAV radicalization, because we talk about 1982, and that's when it was kind of, as it were, all happening. And also to understand this raid, we need to understand the relationship between the Animal Liberation Front and the Northern Animal Liberation League, or the leagues in general, but generally speaking at that time, it was the the Northern Animal Liberation League. And so here you've got a kind of ideological difference, really. The ALF favoured small cells, so small-scale actions which involved rescue and damage, economic sabotage. The NAL was more inclined to do large actions, and the idea there would be to minimize the damage, to get in, as it were, just enough to get into his place. Some rescue, but mainly it was to do with getting photographs and documents. And so that is the kind of ideological difference, if you like. At this time, the early 80s, they were both focused on vivisection. So that was another thing that was kind of the same, if you like. So in this book here, which I have in my hot sticky hand, which is just for you, I'll just drop this out for a second. Yeah, Against All Odds, which actually, if you want to read that in full, it's on that Talon Conspiracy website that I mentioned before. So it's either talonconspiracy.org or .com, and you can read it. It comes up as a readable kind of document. So the author, J.J. Roberts, reports this in the book. There was a degree of ill feeling between the NAL and the ALF, with some NAL organizers disliking the decentralized ALF structure, in inverted commas, because it wasn't really much of a structure, and the large amount of autonomy given to local ALF groups. They were opposed to the idea of 6 or 7 individuals creeping about and intent on doing their own thing. And that comes from a NAL letter sent to the BUAV in May 1981, as you can see. And so the NAL would often criticize the ALF and say, oh, it's kind of, a few people creeping around in the dark, as it were. Whereas their slogan was over the fence when they least expect it, but in the daylight. So that was a major kind of difference, in the sense that most ALF things happened at night, most NAL things happened in the day. And then it goes on to say, some ALF members, on the other hand, very much wanted people to do their own thing and thought that the NAL approach was discouraging activists from organizing and carrying out their own activities. And for those who are eagle-eyed and eagle-eared, you'll see that that view reflects Ronnie's view currently in terms of, the organization of the movement, in terms of whether it disempowers or empowers the grassroots, if you like. And so that becomes an important kind of divide between the two. I did ask Ronnie whether he would agree with that statement, and he said he would, and I would have as well. It kind of adequately talks about the difference between the NAL and the ALF. The only difference, I think, is the fact that it would apply to the leadership, the prime movers of the NAL, much more, say, than the rank and file, because some of the rank and file people were kind of, as it were, in both camps. I myself was really. And then it's a question of whether you, depending on where you were, you kind of abided by the policy of the group that you were with at the time, as it were. And again, there was some tension, because sometimes people kind of didn't, if you like. So that's the divide between the two. And yet, and this is the kind of irony of this story in a way, as it turned out, in 1982, the ALF decided to organize a NAL-type action, which involved hundreds of people and in the daylight. So this was kind of really odd. Roberts goes on to say, there was a further increase in anti-vivisection raids in 1982, and in many ways, the year was a landmark for animal liberation action. First, there was a NAL-type raid on Safe Farm Labs in the English Midlands, a place called Derby, if anybody knows that, in February 1982. And some rabbits were liberated. The press and the TV were present for this action. And 7 activists received suspended sentences. And so Robert says this: the Safe Farm action turned out to be a curtain raiser for what was to follow just a week later. In a large-scale daylight raid, codenamed Operation Valentine, dozens of activists stormed the Life Science Research Lab in Stock, Essex, which is, for people outside of Britain, as it were, is situated just above London, really. It's a kind of county above London, while a demo went on outside. So I was involved with the demo part of it, and it was, from my perspective at least, it was the BUAV who organized the outside part of this. So it was a kind of joint effort, if you like. The activists did their thing inside, and the BUAV were instrumental in organizing what was going to go on outside. So I was kind of involved, but I was a kind of fairly peripheral person at the time, in the sense that at this time, early 80s, I was just getting involved with the BWAV, but I was mainly known as a SAB. And so, you know, and I wasn't involved with the ALF. And so I was kind of relegated to the outside, should we say. So here's a couple of, yes, that's right, Deb. Was the demo a diversionary tactic? Yes, it was indeed. And it worked really well, in the sense that when the police arrived, and as you'll see in the next couple of slides, they arrived pretty quickly. I mean, there's a claim that they only took 15 minutes to arrive. But it basically meant that if there was a whole bunch of activists and an entire bunch of demonstrators, they then have the problem of differentiating, you know, who was who. So that became a major problem, because by the time they arrived, a lot of the activists had got out the back of the building, and a lot of them had come back through and joined, as it were, the demo. So it slowed the police down, and it also confused the issue, which was kind of very useful in that sense. So here's some. I'm going to put it onto that screen there. Here's some bits from the press coverage. So this is, I think, from the Liberator initially. So it's got 3 p.m. And so this is where the activists go in the back. And the picture on the right is somebody with a walkie-talkie, as it were, giving instructions, as it says. And it says, orders are given by masked raiders. And then the next one is interesting. Again, if this had been a now action, the smashing up of the van wouldn't have happened. And in fact, as you'll see, there are kind of different values to the amount of damage that was done. Some put it at, you know, just over 60,000. Others say £100,000, which was quite a lot of money in those days. But this kind of thing would have happened in a now situation, because they would have just got in, you know, do the damage to actually get in the building rather than smash any vehicles up, as it were. Tires were slashed and all the rest of it. Now, it's interesting this, because it says, this is really kind of personal to me, because it says a new van used for transporting animals was smashed. Now, I don't know if you can see that. Let me put it full screen so you can see that. It's probably not very clear, but the suffix letter at the end is a V. And so that means that this van actually was 3 years old, because this is 1979. And the reason I know that is that I was working at Ford's in 1979. So if anybody ever sees a classic Ford Cortina with a suffix V on it, well, the chances are that I put I fitted the back axle to it, because that's what I was doing. So this is 3 years later, so it's not completely brand new. Not that particularly matters that much. And then finally on this, you've got, it says here, 3:15. I'm getting commentary from a cat. 3:15, so the police arrive, and the activists have left, as I said before. And then the picture on the right there is one of the iconic pictures from the actual raid itself. With, you know, the masked person with the beagles. There was a few very similar to that, as it were, made the press. So this is back to Robert's view again. A variety of other animals were rescued. £76,000 worth of damage was caused, more than 60, as I said, and 60 people arrested. That's where I got confused. 8 activists were later sent to prison for their part in the raid. There was also a write-up in the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection's magazine called The Liberator. So this is slightly different. The Liberator said damage estimated £100,000, plus an almost total destruction of a van used to collect other animals for vivisection was the score tallied by the Animal Liberation Front as a result of Operation Valentine. People fled in cars with the police in pursuit, and there were 64 arrests, but importantly, none of the other animals were recovered. because as we kind of know from these actions, if you don't get away quick enough, there's a good chance that the liberated animals can be recaptured, as it were, and then sent back to the laboratory, which always seems like a double betrayal, really. In terms of the mainstream press, this is a famous front page from the Daily Mirror at the time. I'll just put that on full screen so you can see it better. It was described as a historic front page by Kim Stallwood, who was working for the BYV at the time. And the text underneath the word rescued was a hooded army of animal liberation supporters rampaged through a research laboratory yesterday. About 100 of them wielding crowbars and pickaxe handles, smashed doors and windows in the search for animals being used for experiments. They destroyed files, slashed the tires of vans, and daubed it with slogans before carrying off several beagles. Police arrived just after the raiders were escaping in a fleet of cars and minibuses. A high-speed chase followed along country roads, and police said a sizable number of people were arrested. The attack, codenamed Valentine, was launched on Life Science Research Centre at Stock. Now, one interesting thing about this was that this was a kind of the time when the press coverage of direct action in Britain was starting to change. Now, as you can see, most of that is fairly favourable, but they do use obviously phrases like rampage through and this kind of stuff, and also the attack, that kind of thing. You'd expect that, I suppose, but at least they weren't using the T word at the time. And so both Ronnie and I experienced the fact that there was a time when press coverage kind of changed. And so it went from overall positive to overall kind of negative. And that kind of, by the mid-80s, I would say that most of the coverage was pretty kind of negative, unfortunately. Okay, so this is the account from the Red, Black, Green magazine. An Operation Valentine Defence Fund was set up for the 29 activists who were charged with conspiracy to cause criminal damage and steal. Now, I was one of the 60-odd people who were arrested, and there was too many of us to go to the local police station, so we ended up in the gym of a school. I do remember at the time that it was common for people to give the name John Hughes as their name, and so several people did that, and so I think they were dealing with about 30 John Hugheses during the thing, and then it was the question. The police dilemma, I suppose, is the fact that they had to then find out whether any of the activists were amongst any of the demonstrators who were arrested. And so I think there was, kind of some of each, as it were. 17 were convicted in 1983, 8 of whom were imprisoned for between 21 days and 15 months. And a further 9 were fined or ordered to do community service. So at the time, although people like Ronnie Lee had done longer sentences, this was the largest sentence, the 15 months, for quite a while. So it was a bit of a shock, really. I remember being at the BYV when the sentences came in, and people were a little bit shocked by that. And it says there that the sentences were harsh for the time, but they did not stem the tide of direct action. The rest of the 1980s will be an era of animal rights militancy. And then they said life science research never recovered from the raid, and later it was in the decade it merged with Huntingdon Research Centre to become Huntingdon Life Sciences. So that's quite a bit of an interesting bit of history as well. So the actual laboratory that was raided kind of closed down, but then they merged with HLS, and that prompted the Shack campaign. So another bit of history. Okay, going back to Against All Odds then, Operation Valentine attracted a great deal of publicity, causing considerable loss to life sciences. Yeah, Ronnie Lee, a guy called, yeah, Steve. It was Steve Boulding who did, who took the 15 months, wasn't it, Ronnie? And so it was the main organizer from the outside demo. He ended up getting 15 months prison sentence. He was accused of organizing the raid too. Yeah, so in that sense, see, from the police point of view, not that I'm going to be sympathetic, but from the police point of view, it was almost like impossible task for them to kind of differentiate who was who in a way. And so, you know, I guess in that sense, you end up, you know, maybe getting the wrong people. But I suppose from the police point of view, everybody was involved, and so therefore it doesn't matter. You know, everybody's at it, and so you're all fair game in that sense. But they would have had to, because it just wouldn't stand up in court. They would have had to try to differentiate the actual activists who were inside from the demo outside. At the same time, they will have known the demo was there, as Deb suggested, to be a distraction and also to slow them down. So everybody's involved in that sense. Operation Valentine attracted a great deal of publicity, causing considerable loss to live science. 40 of their employees were laid off and won many new recruits for direct action. It was to be the last large-scale ALF daylight raid, and then we get a little bit of kind of analysis of that. In retrospect, there seemed to be no advantage in carrying out such an action in daylight. The extra publicity evident that when serious damage occurred, it was much more difficult for activists to pretend that they were just part of a peaceful demonstration. Indeed, in the Valentine case, several of the peaceful demonstrators ended up being charged with conspiracy. Were they charged burglary or criminal damage? I think it's possibly both. And also, you would, I mean, Ronnie, in the chat, you'll probably know the precise details better than I would on that. Also, they probably would be charged with theft as well, in the sense that other animals are property. And so you would get burglary, theft, criminal damage, you know, and I don't know, maybe the demonstrators, it could be things like, you know, unlawful assembly, obstruction. You know, there could have been a whole range of things. Funny enough, although I was there, my memory of this thing is very kind of hazy, funny enough. It's really weird in the sense that I can't remember getting there. I can't remember getting away. Well, we got away because the police nicked us, but I don't remember what happened after that. I mean, I think I was probably just moved to Liverpool at the time, so we had to then get from the south of England back to Liverpool. Don't remember any of that. It's really quite interesting. BC. Were the activists received in prison by fellow non-activist inmates? Yeah, were they understood and supported? Or, well, that's an interesting one. And in fact, Ronnie and I did a whole series called, was it called Vegan Jailbird Vegans? I think it was Jailbird Vegans. And they were in support. They were fundraisers for different animal sanctuaries. They're still on my YouTube. I think you can probably find them in, you know, a tag, you know, what they call them, you know, the different, I can't remember what the tabs are called now. And it'll be in there. But yeah, when you're in prison with non-vegans and non-activists, there's a variety of responses. In my experience, most of them were pretty good. You know, most of them were pretty positive. You used to get some strange people. I mean, when we were on remand for our big thing that was a few years later, there was a badger baiter on remand too, and he would be always ribbing us about how dangerous badgers are and all this kind of stuff. I used to get the Guardian newspapers sent in, and so I met this guy. We were in the kind of place where you get your dinner, as it were. I met him down there once, and I said, "You're right. I read in the paper that badgers have just started developing nuclear weapons. So you're right, they are dangerous." And he said, "Well, there you are then." so there was that kind of thing going on. But generally speaking, I'd say that most cons were fairly, well, they were fairly positive, but also curious, because one thing they didn't understand is that we weren't paid. They thought that we were paid to do it. And so they were very mean, you know, these are the kind of people who wouldn't get out of bed in the morning without being paid, as it were. And so in that sense, they were a bit mystified by the fact that you've got people who would put themselves at liberty, you know, their liberty on the line, and not get paid for it. And so they were a bit kind of mystified in that sense. Right, so this is going to be a short one. That's good. We'll all be able to get to our beds early today, folks. So if you want to follow up on this, by any chance, there's 2 podcasts, both involving the cranky vegan, Jake Conroy. So the first one, at the top there, Roger Yates, who was part of a historic ALF raid. That's part of a series that Jake did, which I think it's called Some of My Best Friends Were Involved in Some Shit, or something like that. And then the other one is the Radicals and Revolutionary podcast, which it's a more general thing, but Operation Valentine came up in that. Ronnie, they were charged with conspiracy to cause criminal damage. Okay. There must have been other charges than that, though, I would have thought. But that was probably the main one. You know, and as I said, Ronnie will know better than I anyway. So yeah, that will have been it. Okay, so unless you have some more comments or questions, we can call this one to a halt, I think, which is quite interesting. This has been the third. Is this the third or the fourth? The third of the new series of Time Tunnel. It will be every week, and so we're hoping to build a fairly useful archive of the history of the movement. It is very important for people to know the history of the movement, if only not to make the same mistakes that we did all again, if you like. So it's useful in that sense. So that was Operation Valentine, people. I shall, whoops, let me just have a look at that comment again, if anything. Okay. Operation Valentine and Vegan Time Tunnel signing out. Thanks very much for tuning in.